Hi, this is a lecture review for Chapter 9 on Lifespan Development. As always, we have our student learning outcomes first, then our definition of what is developmental psychology. So we'll be talking about the study of how people change or stay the same over the lifespan. And this is across several domains, so biological, social, cognitive, emotional, so kind of just how people grow and change over their life. And developmental psychology is something near and dear to me because I am a developmental psychologist. There's some major issues that developmental psychologists wrestle with. You've probably heard of nature versus nurture. There's also the issue of does change happen in a continuous manner, so gradually, or in a discontinuous manner, in stages. And also if there's critical periods. So if there's certain periods of the lifespan in which you have to obtain some task or gain some kind of ability, or you won't be able to gain it later, or it'll be harder to gain it later. So we know that's the case for things like language. If you don't get it early on, it's harder to get it later. The first thing this unit starts with is a discussion of genetics. So I've got here kind of a description of genetics that I think helps to understand the chromosomes, DNA. That video link below is also a really interesting movie kind of showing genetics and the birth of a baby at the end. So woo, fun if you want to watch that. Chromosomes, this just describes what we're talking about with our chromosomes. An important thing here is that the sex chromosomes are the 23rd pair. So we have the XY for males, the XX for females, and this is generally that this occurs this way. This gives a little overview of DNA and genes, so kind of describes what those are. Those videos are good for further explanation if needed. The genotype and phenotype is an important distinction for this class. So with the genotype, we're talking about what's inside, so what's inherited. So if I wanted to know your genotype, I'd have to pull your blood or something to actually see your genes. The phenotype is what I can see on the outside. So this tells us a little bit about what is in your genotype, but also about your environment. Some information about alleles, definitely review that if you don't remember that from maybe earlier classes, but we know that some are dominant, some are recessive. If they're the same, they're homozygous, different, they're heterozygous. This describes how someone might end up with sickle cell trait or sickle cell disease. So kind of showing the homozygous, heterozygous. Both of these parents are heterozygous, and it shows the dominant and recessive alleles as well. So make sure you understand this chart a little bit. But the important thing for psychology is that most things psychologists are interested in really are an interaction of multiple genes. So we're interested in things that normally are more complicated than something that we would get from only single gene inheritance. Also, we're really interested in genetic predispositions. So we know that most genes are actually dormant, and something in someone's experience actually turns those on or off. So that's what psychologists are really interested in, more so than just one single gene. We're also interested in how these experiences affect the DNA through several generations. So not only the mom, but then the fetus, and then as the fetus is developing here, we see a girl fetus, so she's actually developing her eggs in utero. So we can kind of see this influences working through first, second, and third generation. Review the stages of prenatal development, so each kind of stage has its own name, a couple important things happening at those periods. Just a kind of thought exercise here to kind of think, what would you say to a friend if they were expecting a baby? For most of us, we'd say things like what's available here in this list. So you want to avoid teratogens, anything harmful, drugs, disease, environmental hazards that can impact your baby. And the damage from these teratogens is not always evident at birth. And you want to avoid general risks, like get a good nutrition, take folic acid as appropriate to help with spinal cord development, avoid prolonged extreme stress. So that'll bring us into the actual babies. The baby's been born now. A lot of times if we say, what can a newborn do, we think just, eat, sleep, poop. But they actually have a lot of important capabilities and functions and characteristics that are important to know. The newborn does have reflexes. Some of these are necessary for survival, such as the sucking reflex or the rooting reflex. Others are going to be precursors to things they're able to do later, such as the stepping reflex, where babies will actually step if you hold them upright on a hard surface. Physical growth is very rapid in infancy, so we see a huge kind of development at that point, but average is really a big range, and this is in the terms of measurements for babies. So you can have an average baby who at birth weighs 6 pounds and an average baby who weighs 9 pounds. So it can be a big range in there of average. And that's also the same with skill development. So you'll have some babies that learn to walk pretty early, others that learn to walk a little later, but all of it kind of fits into this average range. Temperament is something really important with babies. So a lot of people who have kids will realize that once you bring your baby home, they have kind of a personality. They're not a blank slate. So psychologists have identified this as temperament and say that babies really have these consistent styles of their behavior that you can see pretty early on. The temperament dimensions are listed here. Some babies are really easy, so they're just simple to kind of deal with. They're generally happy. Their needs are easy to meet. Others, you have to give them a little while, but they'll get there. We call those babies slow to warm up. And difficult babies have a real challenge kind of interacting with their environment. They might be grumpier than usual, take a lot longer to settle than other babies, and average kids don't really fit into one of these categories. Attachment style is something very important with developmental psychology. It's a lifespan construct, which means we study this with babies all the way up through death. But attachment is this bond between the parent and the child. The parent should really serve as a secure base for the baby, so kind of always being there. This work was predicated with early work from Harlow, who looked at monkeys, and he thought that monkeys, or people thought at that time, that monkeys would attach to the object that gave them food, that food was the major issue here. But he found that monkeys really wanted that comfort from a parent, not just the one that would feed them. Attachment in humans, we study that with a strange situation. So generally it's a research protocol. We look at the child's reaction when the parent is there with the child, and then when the parent leaves, and then when they return. So it's kind of all it is. The kid is there with the mom, generally the mom. Mom will walk out of the room, see what the baby does. Mom will come back, see what the baby does. So we've been able to categorize infants' reactions to this with a couple categories. Secure babies might cry a little when mom leaves, but they're soothed when she comes back. Avoidant babies are not really that upset when she leaves, or they're not visibly upset, and they ignore her when she returns. Insecure resistant babies are upset at the separation, and they're still upset at the reunion, so they want to let mom know that they're upset. And then disorganized babies, they're just kind of confused. They might show odd behavior. They might approach the mom and then back off, look scared, maybe fall on the floor and cry, and then come back to her a little bit. So they might show some odd types of behavior. And attachment is really important, again, because we think that these ways that kids interact with their parents, that this becomes internalized, and they follow through with those kind of interaction patterns as adults. So you may know adults who get very upset when their partner leaves, aren't happy when they get back, they're just really upset. Or those who try to meet their own needs and ignore their partner, don't really act upset when they leave. So we kind of see this happening in older kids as well. An important thing to realize too with the rest of this, or with some of this material, is that it will get a little bit choppy because it is going from topic to topic. But with our language development, we know that kids will, or that parents will speak to their kids in what we call motherese. So it's this talk like, oh, aren't you a cute baby? You're the best baby ever. I love you, baby. So a little higher pitched and slower. Theories of how we develop our gender role are important. So social learning theory, this says we learn through things like reinforcement and punishment. So if a little boy walks up with an army figure, his dad might say, great job, son, nice choice. But if the same little boy walks up with a Barbie instead, the dad might slap it out of his hand, which is punishment. So he would learn, not to pick up those toys in the future. The other idea is that we might learn through gender, or we might pick up things through our gender schema. So we would categorize objects or things as being for our gender or not for our gender. Only those that we decide are for our gender would we actually interact with and learn more about. So kind of our cognitive representations help characterize whether or not we're going to interact with something. The parenting styles are very interesting research, and what this does is look at a couple dimensions. So we have parental control and parental involvement, and then we take those dimensions and say, are you high or low? And then you can make these categories of parents. So I would encourage you to watch the videos linked below and see if you can determine what category fits along, or what these parents, the examples fit along with which part of this graph here. We think that authoritative is the most optimal type of parenting style from our research. This chart just shows a bit about parenting styles, or it's a comic about parenting styles. Cognitive development. Piaget is a very, very important influential theorist. So he thought people move through stages, their children move through stages in their cognitive development, and here are his stages. So the first is sensory motor. So he thinks at this stage we learn from sensory input and from motor input. He said kids don't yet have object permanence, so if you take something from them, they won't realize it's gone. Pre-operational kids are a little bit older. They have some symbolic thought, but they still make some errors. The next stage is concrete operational. These kids understand logic, but not until formal operational, formal operational stage will they really get abstract thought. This chart goes through his stages there, and that's going to pull us into adolescence. So we know adolescence is this transition from childhood to adulthood. Puberty kind of marks this transition, so we get sexual maturity. Got a couple really important parts of puberty highlighted. We know there's a lot of factors that influence when people start puberty. So one of these is genetics. The environment's also important, so things like your body size, people who are larger start puberty earlier. And a really interesting finding to come out of this work is that family relationships are important. So girls who don't have their father in the home seem more likely to start puberty earlier, which is an interesting finding. This timing of puberty impacts boys and girls differently. So boys often report liking starting puberty early or being one of the first. Girls do not like being one of the first to start puberty. Social development, we see some changes happen in our social development with adolescents. Relationships with our parents can become a little more conflictual. Many teens are going to enter their first romantic relationship at this point. Peers become really important socializers. Identity development, Erikson, his theory really was lifespan theory, so it goes from infancy to the end of the life. And he said this is how we develop in psychosocial stages, so develop our identity. At each stage, we have a crisis that we need to solve and a virtue that we're going to gain. And we're going to talk some about his stages, but here in adolescence, we're trying to identify our own identity versus getting into role confusion. He uses a list of Erikson stages, kind of telling you the ages that are typical for his stages, so that might help you for some of these questions to realize what age people are, to see what stage they should be in. Moral reasoning, this is something I would encourage you to watch this video. It's kind of an interactive video. But most people are going to reason at the conventional level. So the book kind of talks about pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional, and how this looks. Normally we see kids in the pre-conventional level. Most adults end at the conventional level, and then some get to post-conventional. So one interesting thing to think about is what really makes someone an adult? This is a difficult question, and we know in the United States and in several developed nations, we end up seeing what we call emerging adulthood. So this is a period where people explore, their life might be a bit unstable, but this is relatively recent. It doesn't occur in all cultures. Some things about adults and their social development, adults will often have fewer friends. And their lovers, we end up seeing this traditional family being no longer the norm. So many people are having children before they enter into marriage, and people are entering marriage at later and later ages. Straight couples, this is an interesting graphic about straight couples and how they meet their partners. And what this really shows is that there are becoming fewer ways in which people meet each other. So now it seems like if you want to meet a partner, really your best bets are through friends, at a bar or restaurant, or online. So we're not meeting as many people in these other situations as we used to. So interesting cultural shifts. Children, most people, we do have a greater societal acceptance for the decision not to have kids. So Time ran this cover, The Child-Free Life, but most people still say they want to have kids. Changes in marriage with kids, this is kind of what I call the sad chart for me, but we often see when people have kids that their marital satisfaction does decrease, and it starts to increase once the kids leave home. There's some important changes in adulthood, so menopause, for women, this is the end of reproductive capacity. We don't see that same kind of end for men. In social development, Erikson said that our biggest task in middle adulthood is generativity, so to care about, nurture the next generation. That'll bring us into aging. So we know the idea of older adulthood as a time of poor health is a myth. Many people do age successfully. People do generally see some cognitive changes when they age, but people with higher education or who remain active in the environment, they end up kind of declining less slowly. Erikson said our most important task at this stage is to have integrity, so we want to feel that we've lived a good life. And then dying, death and dying. So Kubler-Ross, you can review her stages, but the important thing there is that those stages are not universal. What we really see from death and dying is that many reactions can be normal. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. Let me know if you have any questions on lifespan development.